Welcome back to One American Baseball Podcast. You join us for episode 37. And folks, this is an exciting one. It is the first ever One American Baseball Podcast season awards episode. We're going to do some season awards for you guys from both the Guardians and the Reds. Then we're going to get into some positional grades that we gave both the Guardians and the Reds for this season. How do we think they performed? And then lastly, we'll cover some of the AL and NLDS action as well as the ALCS game one that just happened last night as we are recording on Monday, October 13th. Chris, how are you doing without Guardians baseball?
I'm actually getting along pretty well. It's been super entertaining to watch the division series, especially actually both series were both sides were pretty entertaining, especially the Tigers and Yankees the Tigers and Mariners was a really good series. I got the Blue Jays and Mariners up on my TV in the background. So that's a really good game as well. So very entertaining.
Yeah, it's nice to watch baseball a little bit stress-free. Obviously, I think you and I both still have some rooting interests in some of the matchups, but you're not stressing the same as you are when it's the Guardians or the Reds, and you can just enjoy the game a little bit, which is nice. And see some guys that you don't really get to see a ton. But yeah, you want to go ahead and dive into your season awards for the Guardians?
Yeah, so we came up with I believe it's four categories for our awards. So the first one we did was the most underappreciated, and then another one we came up with was the most clutch. Another category was most improved, and then our last category was the best arm. So I'll get into who my most underappreciated player on the Guardians was this year. And I think this is a pretty hot take, but Austin Hedges was my most underappreciated Guardian this year. I think it matches the definition of underappreciated. He is not a good player statistically whatsoever. However, he did have his best offensive season since 2019. He put up a 527 OPS this past year, which was good for a 47 OPS. In 2019, he had a 50 OPS plus. So he was a little bit less or a little bit less than half as good as league average offensively. However, he put up an 820 OPS in the last month. And if you remember, the Guardians won 20 and 7, and he caught a lot of games in that stretch, and he was part of a lot of rallies that went on. So I think the month of September that Hedges had, both offensively and defensively, kind of won him this award for me. Now, he only played 68 games, but he came into a lot of close games this year, which I think kind of goes unnoticed when you look at his baseball reference and stuff like that. He also, by the defensive run save metric, he was ranked ninth in baseball display or among catchers. He was tied for ninth in baseball, and that's playing 68 games. So if he was the starting catcher, he wouldn't be able to last as a starting catcher in this league just because he's so bad offensively. But if he was to catch 162 games a year, he would be like Patrick Bailey level, or maybe even better than Patrick Bailey. He caught 15 out of 45 base stealers this year, which was good for a 33% caught stealing rate, which is elite. He was also That puts him 94th percentile in caught stealing above average per Baseball Savant, and then he was also 95th percentile in framing. So he stole a lot of strikes, and that is another underappreciated stat is the framing metric for catchers. With umpiring, especially without the ABS being into effect this year, that puts a lot more incentive in catchers who can frame the ball and steal strikes. Because there are a lot of instances where the Guardians walked guys, and then those runs came around to score, and that limits runs when you can steal strikes like that, especially when you had pitchers who walked a lot of people like Gavin Williams and Tanner Bybee to an extent. So. And that doesn't even mention his leadership aspect in the clubhouse. The Guardians they missed the playoffs in 23 when Hedges he started the year with the Pirates, and then he got traded to the Rangers at the trade deadline. They ended up winning the World Series. But the last three times that Hedges has been on this roster, the Guardians have made the playoffs. And you can't really, the Guardians have, with the historic run that they went on in September, that's a culture thing. That's, that's never been done by a team. And that's just an unwavering faith that, uh, this team had. And it starts with the leadership in the clubhouse. Um, So yeah, Austin Hedges is my most underappreciated player. You could argue with the wall. Comment down below who you think. Well, eh, for any of these players, any of these awards, comment down below who you think won if you disagree with any of our choices. So I think there is a lot of room to argue just because this is so subjective. Um, my most clutch player on the Guardians was Bo Naylor this year. Um, Bo Naylor is I feel like he's a very polarizing player on the Guardians. A lot of people like him, a lot of people don't really like him. Um, I personally, I think that he's a good player. I think that he got pretty unlucky with the way that balls were falling and stuff, and he didn't get enough credit throughout the season for working at bats and just being tough on pitchers. And just the leadership that he provided with being the starting catcher in the clubhouse and leading a pitching staff that ended up going on a run in the last month of the season that we've never seen before, at least from a starting pitching standpoint. And the reason I picked Bo Naylor for this award was because he had an 828 OPS with runners in scoring position, and he had a 661 OPS in the regular season overall. So, that's a pretty significant difference in the his production with runners in scoring position as opposed to just overall. It seemed like having watched most of the games this year, it seemed like he was always involved in a rally in some fashion. Even if he had even if he got out, it seemed to be a productive out, or he worked a walk, or it was like an eight pitch at bat that resulted in a strikeout, or he would usually do something productive, even if it didn't show up on the box score. Um, and he had some of the biggest hits down the stretch for this team. I don't think that without Bo Naylor in the lineup, I don't think that the Guardians would have made the postseason because, yeah, like I said, he had several hits that changed the trajectory of a lot of games or single-handedly won the Guardians the game. And it's, in the postseason when the one game that they did win, Bo Naylor had a three-run homer in it. So I think Bo Naylor gets the most clutch award. And you could argue that Jose Ramirez is more deserving of this award, but you don't see Jose Ramirez putting up an 1100 OPS as opposed to his usual 850 or 900 OPS or whatever it is. He's Bo is just so clutch. He's so much more productive compared to just in regular situations. That's why I picked him. Um, Next category, most improved. It was down to two people for this. The first, or I think the second most deserving player of this award goes to Brian Rocchio. He had a really rough start to the season. He got sent down to the minors in May, and his OPS was hovering around 500. And then he had a 689 OPS in the second half of the season. He got called up in July, and that was good for a 91 OPS plus. And he wasn't playing as great a defense at second base when he did transition over, but he showed a lot of promise defensively in the end of the season. And that's not to mention the amount of promise that he showed in the second half of the season. I feel like he didn't really build on his postseason last year in the first month plus of the season, but he really picked up where he left off in the postseason when he went to the minors and worked on a couple of things and then came back. He looked very much like the player that he was in the postseason last year. So I was really glad to see that. I think that throughout the year, Brian Rocchio got a lot better. But I think the most deserving of this award goes to Gavin Williams. Um, he he was our ace going down the stretch. He was one of the best players in baseball the second half. He had a 7-1 record. I'll just read his second half of the year stats because they're mind-boggling. He finished the year 7-1 in the second. This is post All-Star break. 7-1 with a 2.18 ERA, 1.05 WHIP, which is very, very good. He had three strike. His strikeout to walk rate was 3-1, which in the first half of the season it was 1.7-1. So he really cleaned up his walks in a big way. He that was the biggest thing that he struggled with was walking people. He throughout the whole season he had a walk rate of 4.5 per nine, which is pretty bad. Um, but yeah, like I said, he really cleaned it up the second half. He had a 188 batting average against the second half as well, which is elite. That doesn't really that sort of indicates that the stats that he put up the second half are sustainable just because he was that dominant, giving just limiting hits and limiting base runners. Um, but last season he put up negative point 0.1 WAR. He only started 16 games last year, and he put up a 4.86 ERA. And this year his wins above replacement total was 3.8. He started 31 games. He pitched to a 3.06 ERA, and he struck out 173 batters with a final walks and hits per innings pitch of 1.27. So the first half of the season alone was he was a pretty average pitcher the first half of the season, but even that was an improvement on what he did last year. And then he really like I mean he was one of the top five pitchers in all of baseball the second half of the season. Um, so I can't say enough about how promising Gavin Williams looked for this team. Um, Next award is best arm. I had two candidates for this as well. Um, when I kind of wrote this out, it made it a lot more apparent. But my second place finisher for this award was Gabriel Arias. He when he moved over to shortstop, that really unlocked a lot of potential in his arm. Well, the potential was there, but it really played into his strengths a lot as a defender. He's 94th percentile according to Baseball Savant in arm strength, and he's been clocked around 93 miles an hour in his throws to first, which yeah, that's very, very good. And when he was playing second base, he didn't really get the opportunity to use that very much. There were some instances earlier in the season where he'd get a relay throw and then he'd gun the runner down, and if he had like a league average arm, he wouldn't have thrown the runner out. But there were still a lot of instances of which he made really good relay throws and he gunned the runner down, and he helped people like Stephen Kwan get outfield assists. And that kind of leads me into Stephen Kwan. As far as arm value goes on Baseball Savant, he was 100th percentile. He was 68th percentile in arm strength, but I think that the best arm award goes to Stephen Kwan just because of how well he's able to utilize his talent as a fielder. He doesn't have the strongest arm in the league, but he led the league in outfield assists with 13 this year, and he also saved 22 runs, which was tied for the most in baseball. And actually, the person he was tied with was Ernie Clement, so former Guardian there. But yeah, those are my season awards for the Guardians. So, like I said, let us know who you think won the awards for our teams.
Yeah, Chris, I think it's interesting that you gave most underappreciated to Austin Hedges. I don't think a lot of people would give that award to him as for the Guardians, but I think backup catchers are one of those positions in baseball that they're way more important than people think they are because like your catcher is your one guy who cannot play 162. He's going to play like 120 maybe behind the dish. I think that would probably be like the best catcher season would give you 120 behind the plate. So you need a guy who, is serviceable at the plate or, is elite defensively. And Austin Hedges is obviously elite defensively. And like you said, he was really good the last month of the season. And, I don't think it's any coincidence that the Guardians had that really good stretch in September because Austin Hedges was playing well in conjunction with that. I think, that's definitely part of it because like Reds fans have seen in years gone by, backup catchers, play a role. Luke Maley, when we had him, he was terrible, and we lost a lot of the games that he caught. And so it's definitely important. And I think it's interesting to see you give Hedges that award. But I'll go ahead and get into my awards for the Reds, starting off with most underappreciated. I'm going Tony Santillan. Um, Put up three WAR out of the bullpen. He was second in the league in appearances. So, he had a lot of appearances to rack up that much WAR, but being that effective with that many appearances is pretty impressive too. He had a 2.44 ERA. That's good for a 188 ERA plus. So he was 88% or 88 points better than the league average pitcher when it comes to ERA. Um, and he came in, he took the ball anytime he was needed. He was often in very tense and close situations, and more oftentimes than not, he got us out of those situations. I think, he's a guy that probably deserved a lot more credit than he was afforded, and it's probably he didn't get that because he wasn't closing games. Um, I think if he's our closer and he racks up probably 30 plus saves, which I think Emilio Pagan had 30 plus saves this year. If Tony Santillan is the guy closing these games, a lot more people are appreciating him and recognizing him as having a pretty elite season. But because he was like the eighth inning guy and the setup guy. He wasn't getting a lot of that appreciation. Um, I think, Emilio Pagan might not be back next year. There's I think he said that he wanted to come back, but um, it'll be up to the Reds if they want to re-sign him. But, I even if Pagan comes back, I think Tony Santillan deserves to get a shot as this team's closer after the season he had, and I think he was the most underappreciated Red this year. Most clutch. This is probably going to be the one that surprises people the most. I'm giving it to Will Benson. Um, Part of that is probably because I'm a big Will Benson truther and a big Will Benson enjoyer. But Baseball Reference has a couple stats that they use to try to quantify clutch. Things like wins probability added. They have a stat called clutch. Then they have some like really in the weeds stats where they adjust them based on context and then subtract the context based versus the non-context based. It's a lot of stats to look at. But anyway, Will Benson led the team in win probability added and clutch from Baseball Reference. So I guess you can't argue with stats. These are obviously very made up and impossible to quantify stats, but Baseball Reference likes Will Benson in the clutch, and so do I. He's a guy that he seems to have a slow heartbeat at the plate, and he's able to take quality at bats, and he doesn't really chase pitches out of the zone. If he's swinging and missing, which he does quite a bit, I can recognize that it's on pitches in the zone. He's not really um, chasing. He's not hurting himself a lot at the plate. And, he didn't always come up with the huge highlight hit. But he would often, be able to drive in the run when we needed it. I remember there was a Cardinals game in September where we had the bases loaded, and he came in to pinch hit for, I think it was Cabrian Hayes, and he didn't swing too big. He didn't let the moment get too big. He just hit a sac fly that wound up being the game-winning run. So, in a spot where you need to drive in a run, I think Will Benson was probably the most clutch player on this team. Um, I think there are a lot of people who would argue that it was not Will Benson. But I just based on the stats that I looked at, he's the guy that I think deserves it. Now, most improved was Noel V. Marte. He was awful last year, as was well documented after coming back from his steroid suspension. It was really bad. He was worth negative 1.8 WAR and had a 49 OPS plus, and that was only in the second half of the season. Um, this year he started in AAA and to earn his spot back on the team. Came back, got hurt. was sent back down to AAA after he came back off the injured list and then earned a spot again as an everyday starter for this team. He was worth 1.4 WAR. He had 14 home runs with a 99 OPS plus. He slumped a little down the stretch, which hurt that OPS plus quite a bit. But you know, he's definitely the most improved on this team. He just needs to continue to adjust to the league as pitchers adjust to him. I think he started to swing and miss and chase a lot of stuff down the stretch when he started to slump. And if he can, make the adjustment as the league adjusts to him, he's going to be really good for this team. He also takes home best arm, so Noelvi Marte is cleaning up the awards in the Reds section of the One American Baseball Podcast Awards show. Um, Moving to right field really unlocked his arm talent. He's 93rd percentile in arm strength per Baseball Savant. He's worth +1 arm value in right field. He had 3 outfield assists, and that was only 54 games in the outfield, which is, I mean, he's learning a new position. Um, and, 3 outfield assists in 54 games when you haven't ever played that position in the big leagues, I think is pretty impressive. And he has a cannon out there. The defensive grades aren't great. If you look at them, the metrics don't love him, but it's because he's, still learning how to read fly balls. A lot of the metrics are don't love his defense because he misplayed quite a few fly balls in right field, but the arm talent is definitely there. But he's playing in the Dominican Winter League to help improve his outfield defense, which I love to see too. That'll be good for him. But that's what I have for my Reds season awards, and we'll dive into our positional grades now if you want to kick that off. You're muted, Chris.
I just want to kind of touch on Tony Santion because I think that a Guardian, I think that one of the back end relievers would have won this award last year if we would have done this last
Hmm.
year, if this podcast had existed last year at this time. But I think that Tony Santion was pretty comparable to a guy like Kate Smith or Hunter Gaddis last year. I think actually Hunter Gaddis probably would have won this award last year because Cade Smith was properly recognized, but both of those guys last year were borderline top 10 relievers in baseball, and Hunter Gaddis didn't really get the love that, Cade Smith or Emmanuel Clase got. So he was just kind of in their shadows, but Hunter Gaddis put up a great season last year and had similar WAR metrics. So anyway, I'll get into my Guardians positional grades. I'll start with left field just because my brain was thinking left to right when I wrote this out. So I'm gonna give left field a B plus, and the reason I don't give an A was because Quan slumped a lot at the end of the season, but he's probably gonna win his fourth consecutive Gold Glove. And his hitting was just below league average, so it wasn't atrocious. And there's a lot of intangibles that Stephen Kwan provides that you can't really quantify, such as just the presence that he has at the plate, how annoying he is to pitchers, just his ability to work at bats, just foul balls off and stuff like that. Now I will say that he didn't do that quite as much. I know he was dealing with the wrist injury in the middle of the season, and I would imagine that that was hurting his performance a lot down the stretch. And he's not a great second half hitter, but yeah, Stephen Kwan was definitely the strongest outfielder, strongest part of the outfield, I will say for the Guardians by quite a wide margin. Um, Getting into center field, I got to give this a C minus. It was mainly Angel Martinez and Daniel Schneemann, and they both were good. They both were decent utility guys. I think Schneemann was a little bit better, a little bit more consistent. Um, However, I will say that Martinez played a little bit better defense than Schneemann did. Schneemann was a little bit more down the stretch. He played a little bit more center field, and he played a little bit deep in center field. But Schneemann is a really good all-around fielder, and he played an okay center field, but they were just pretty underwhelming at the plate overall. Yeah, I don't really have much else to say about center field. It was just okay. right field was a disaster. I'm gonna give right field a D. Jonathan Rodriguez was probably the worst right fielder defensively I've seen in a long, long time in a Guardians uniform. He just could not read a ball off the bat to save his life, and he didn't hustle out there. And yeah, I just and you know John Kenzie Noel was played right field a lot, and he was passable defensively. He didn't do anything crazy, but he wasn't going to make any of the dumb mistakes that Jonathan Rodriguez really made. Um, Nolan Jones played a lot of right field. Now Nolan Jones was a little bit better defensively. He didn't have very good range. Nolan Jones also played center field now that I think about it, and it kind of made me anxious when Nolan Jones was in center field just because of, his range isn't that good. But his glove is okay. His arm is really good. I think it worked very well in right field with his arm being the way it is, and he was able to. Um, I didn't take a look at his outfield assists or anything, but he does have a very good arm in right field. So. But the offense was a complete disaster for the most part in right field. John Kenty Noel put up like a 400 450 OPS or something like that. Nolan Jones put up around a 600 OPS, and Jonathan Rodriguez in the limited time that he played, I mean, he was pretty underwhelming at the plate. It did get a little bit better. I think that the thing that saves right field from being an F is that CJ Kafis came up, made his debut, and he played better defense, and he also provided a little bit more pop at the plate and a little bit more consistency. So CJ Kafis he was still below average offensively, but he was a massive improvement. And I think that right field is definitely next year. If we do these awards next year, I could see right field being a huge improvement. Just because, you got CJ Kafis, you got Chase DeLauter. Hopefully he stays healthy. Um, and you also have George Valera. If, he's a wild card health wise as well. But you got those three guys who I like their bats a lot better. And Chase DeLauter plays a pretty good right field defensively. So third base, getting into our infield now. This is a very solid A. The reason that I don't give third base an A plus is because Jose Ramirez, it to be to I think for me to get an A plus, you gotta be like a Gold Glover defensively, and you gotta be an MVP candidate at the plate. And Ramirez played solid defense, but it wasn't really much to write home about. He's 32, he's 33 years old now, I think, and his defense has declined a little bit, but it still wasn't bad. And obviously at the plate, this Jose Ramirez narrative has been beat to a dead horse, but he's a perennial top five MVP candidate, and I don't think there's really much else to say about third base that already hasn't been said. Getting into shortstop, this is a little bit more of an interesting one for me. Shortstop, I originally wrote down a B minus. I think it might be more like a C to C plus, but I'll give it a C plus for now. Um, Offense was a disaster while Brian Rocchio was having his struggles before he got sent down. Um, Roki was decent defensively at shortstop. He wasn't like Francisco Lindor level or Andres Jimenez level. If Andres Jimenez has played some shortstop recently, but he wasn't that type of level. He's a tier or two below Gold Glover at shortstop, and I think he'll improve a lot defensively at second base next year if he gets a lot more playing time. But anyway, I'm going off a tangent. Our Gabriel Arias moved over to shortstop, and um, I think C plus is fair because he played very good defense while he was at shortstop, and like I said earlier, it really helped unlock. Uh, it really played into his strength as far as his arm goes. Um, so yeah, the offense and defense improved throughout the season at shortstop. So I got to give it a C plus. Um, Second base is a D plus. It was a revolving door at second base. There wasn't really until Brian Rocchio came back up and he got moved over to second base. There wasn't really a whole lot of stability at this position, but The offense was nothing really to write home about. Angel Martinez, I already talked about him at the plate. He was very inconsistent. He could provide some value at times, but he's just too inconsistent. And at second base was a very weak position for Martinez. Um, like I said earlier, Brian Rocchio was okay at second base, and Brian Rocchio got a lot better offensively, but it still wasn't much to write home about. You also had Daniel Schneemann at second base, and he was a pretty decent defender at second base. Daniel Schneemann, you know what you're going to get out of him. He's going to be, you know, 10 to 20% below league average at the plate. Um, he'll give you some pop at times, but he's not going to be he's not going to be a star or anything, but he'll be a solid utility guy. I'm trying to think of who else played second base throughout the year, but I think that is about it. But first base gets a B minus for me. Um, Start off with Santana and Manzardo platooning. So the defense was really, really good while Santana was around. And Santana, if you remember, he had a really good month of May. He put up like a 900 some OPS, but after May, it was pretty downhill for Carlos Santana. Obviously, he got released, and I think it was August. Um, but Kyle Manzardo was pretty solid offensively. He was inconsistent at times, but he had 27 home runs and he put up an OPS of almost 800. So he was one of our best hitters, and I think B minus is a pretty fair grade for first base. Now Noel and Kefis played a little bit of first base down the stretch. Kefis is actually a really good defensive first baseman, and I think it's gonna be interesting to see how this team manages the first base and right field position next year because there are a lot of guys on the team who could play those two positions and not a whole lot of spots. Um, but Noel was pretty shaky at first base defensively. I know he played a lot of first base in the minor leagues, but it didn't really translate from what I saw at the major league level for the most part. Um, and I already talked about Noel and Cavis at the plate. So moving on to designated hitter, you had Santana and Manzardo platooning once again. I originally gave DH a C minus, and the reason I gave it a little bit lower than first base was because you had guys like Jonathan Rodriguez, and you just had a revolving door at the designated hitter. And I feel like to get an A or B at the designated hitter, you got to have like an A plus would be Kyle Schwarber or I don't know, somebody like that. Somebody who's going to hit 50, 60 home runs or whatever. And at best, you were getting Jose Ramirez on his 1 day a week where he was the designated hitter. So moving on to catcher, I give catcher a C minus, and Bo Naylor was okay offensively. He was about average offensively for a catcher, and he was about average as far as defense goes as well. He took a bit of a step back defensively from last year. Bo Naylor did, um, but he's shown a lot of promise. So I would say that catcher is definitely subject to be improved upon next year. And I already talked about Austin Hedges. His, I think he brings the grade down a little bit with his hitting, but he kind of brings it back up a little bit with his defense. So, anyway, starting pitching, I got to give starting pitching an A minus. What I saw from the starting pitching staff this year was super impressive, especially coming off of last year when starting pitching was really the biggest weakness on the team. And it really didn't start that great. And I think that's the thing that's keeping me from giving the starting pitching an A or an A plus is the start to the year that the starting pitchers had, especially with Tanner Bybee not really coming into form until the last month of the season. Not really being, we didn't really have an ace until September or really like August with Gavin Williams sort of emerging as our ace. But in September, I've kind of beat this conversation a dead horse as well, but it was a historic run that this pitching staff went on, and I think that bumps the starting pitching up quite a bit. Relief pitching, a bit of a step back from last year. I got to give the relief pitching a B minus. That it was still decent. I think that Emmanuel Clase, the whole situation that happened with him brings the relief pitching down quite a lot. Cade Smith did his best. He was really rocky his first few weeks in the closer role, but he eventually settled into that, and you didn't really see the same Cade Smith as last year until about the August mark in the season, or maybe September, early September. Um, you didn't really see the same Hunter Gaddis either. I mean, he was solid, but he wasn't the elite reliever like he was last year. Um, you didn't really have a Pedro Avila type in this bullpen either. He was very instrumental to that bullpen last year. And Colby Allard was a good long relief guy, but Pedro Avila was a guy that you could trust in high leverage. And Colby Allard was okay as well, but he was a little bit less trustworthy just as far as his stuff goes. Um, but yeah, those are my season grades for the Guardians. I'd love to make a graphic on this. I think that'd be cool. But I think I help visualize it a lot.
Yeah, the graphic may be a little above our pay grade right now, but keep watching, keep commenting, keep rating 5 stars, and maybe then we'll have a little bit of a graphics budget to work with. But I'll get into my Reds positional grades. I'll start off at catcher. The catcher spot earns a C from me. It was tough because Tyler Stevenson missed a lot of time with injury this year, and then when he came back, he struggled a lot with swing and miss. He's about a league average bat. He's not a great defensive catcher when you look at pop time and framing metrics. He's really good at blocking. He's um, in, I think, the 94th percentile or something when it comes to blocking, but the pop time and framing metrics are not good at all for him. Um, I think if you get a healthy Tyler Stevenson all year, the offensive numbers look a lot better than they than they did where they landed, but that's how it was this year. Jose Trevino was red hot to start the year, and then cooled off in the second half. So, that hurts the grade a little bit too. I still think he's one of the best backup catchers in baseball. Just given the position or given the production that people expect to get from that position, I still think he's one of the best in baseball. He provided a lot of defensive value that Tyler Stevenson didn't. So, factoring in Stevenson's league average offense, below league average defense, Trevino is below league average as a hitter, but is around league average as a defensive catcher. They grade out as about a perfectly average tandem, so that's why I gave them a C. Moving on to first base, this gets a B plus. Spencer Steer, won the spot and locked it down in like late May for the Reds after the Christian Encarnacion Strand experiment ended for this year. And he was pretty good as a first baseman for the Reds. He played elite defense at first base. He was worth 6 outs above average at first base. The offensive numbers aren't great, but when you sort of do a little bit of manipulation, they look better. You got to remember he missed most of spring training, and then because of injuries and stuff, he was forced onto the opening day roster. So for pretty much all of April, um, it was basically like he was playing spring training ball. Um, if you get rid of his April stats, he was slashing 252, 326, 441. If you look at his stats overall, he's a 238, 312, 411 guy. I think, if you get rid of his April stats, that's where you can expect Spencer Steer to end up most years. He also had 20 plus home runs this year. I think he's the first Red to have 20 plus home runs in his first 3 seasons, or not the first Red, but he's in some pretty elite company with guys like Jay Bruce, and a couple other Reds legends. So Spencer Steer is a pretty elite player, I think, given his defensive contributions, and he's right around to a little bit above league average offensively this year, if you factor out April. So that's why he gets a B plus. And I think he's this team's first baseman of the future, at least for the next couple years. Second base gets a D. It's this position was just dreadful for the Reds all year. Matt McLain struggled really heavily this year. He's one of the worst hitters in baseball by some metrics. The only thing that keeps this above an F is that his defense was good. It was worth 5 outs above average. But this is a lot like, you know, um, second base or right field for the Guardians, where the only thing keeping this above an F is that there was a little bit of um, defense that offset the terrible offense. Shortstop Ali gets a B plus. He's this team's superstar, but he struggled mightily in the second half, and he led the league in errors again, and that knocks this down to a B plus. I mean, he's still a really good player. He's a guy that you want playing on your team, but he needs to be like J-Ram, where you can every year give him an A if he really wants to be a superstar in this league and if the Reds really want to succeed. If he had been able to keep his first half pace, this is easily an A. He was an all-star, and then the post all-star break, he really cooled off. He was dealing with some injury stuff, but the numbers weren't pretty post all-star break. I think he went like 48 games without a home run or something like that. I think the big problem was that he played all 162. He didn't get a day off. Um, and that was a goal of his, a well-documented goal of his coming into the season. But I think next year you can't let him play all 162 if the fatigue is going to affect him like it did this year. Um, I think if he didn't play all 162, he probably is able to keep up a better pace, and I can give him an A. But he gets a B plus for the season he had. Third base is another D for this team. Much like second base, it was a positional black hole for the Reds that is only above an F because of Ke'Bryan Hayes' defensive ability. Whether it was Santiago Espinal or Ke'Bryan Hayes taking painstaking at bat after painstaking at bat, or Noelvi Marte um, making error after error on a throw to first base. The Reds really couldn't seem to figure out third base. You're either getting defense or offense from that position and not really both for the Reds. And it seems to be a common theme for the Reds that they struggle to find a third baseman that can sort of provide value in both defense and offense ever since we traded Eugenio. We've had Mike Moustakas try and play third base and Jeimer Candelario play third base, and those are two terrible contracts that the Reds are still sort of having to deal with because Candelario is still on the books for the Reds. We still owe him some money. And Moustakas was the same way. I think we finally paid that off, but it's not a good position for the Reds. Left field gets a C. I think if Austin Hayes is healthy for most of the year, this is probably a better grade. But he was rarely healthy. He played good defense out there. He was a big part of the offense when he was healthy, but he just was never really healthy. It was just sort of a rotating cast of left fielders. Gavin Lux was a decent option in left field. He takes good at bats, but his defense isn't great in left field, and he didn't really show a lot of pop this year. So, that's why this grades out as a C. Center field I have it as a B minus. I think I'm going to change that to a B. I think TJ Friedl was one of the most underrated outfielders in baseball. He was quietly worth 2.3 WAR this year. He provided the Reds with top 10 in the league on base percentage from the leadoff spot. And, he provided some pop in the leadoff spot too with 14 home runs. Um, Overall, a pretty good year for TJ. I think he was right around league average, maybe a little bit better in terms of OPS plus, but I think he was really good at the plate. He was worth 1 out above average defensively. You would like to see that a little bit higher from your center fielder. He's starting to get up there in age, so that there are some concerns with the fielding ability. And you would like to see the batting average maybe a tick higher from your leadoff guy, but overall, TJ Friedl had a really good year, and he gets a B. Right field gets a C. Much like left field, it was just an outfield position that was sort of league average for the Reds in a rotating cast of people. We got decent offensive production out of Noelvi Marte for a while before he slumped, and his defense wasn't great. And then you also had the Will Benson streaks in there that sort of bring it up a little bit. But it's a position where guys were just sort of hot and cold. So it gets a C for me. DH gets a C. It's that's just sort of whoever is DH that day. It's not really we had a specific DH. I do think Miguel Andujar was really great in this position, and I would really like to see the Reds bring him back to be our DH next year, or like a bench bat option or something. Starting pitching gets an A. I teetering on A plus. I think they're right in that conversation where they could earn either. They were one of the best staffs in baseball. They were second in the league in FWAR as a starting pitching unit, and they were ninth in ERA. All of our starters were worth at least two BWAR, and they were just really consistent for pretty much the whole year. There were a couple injuries. Hunter Green was out for a little bit, but Andrew Abbott, after missing like the first week of the season with an injury, Nick Lodolo missed a couple starts here and there, but for the most part, this was a pretty consistent starting staff. Guys like Brady Singer and Nick Martinez, who you could rely on to take the ball every fifth day. Um, so it was really good to see. They were a really really good starting staff. Relief pitchers get a B for me. We had a really good back into the bullpen with Tony Santillan and Emilio Pagan, but the rest of the bullpen was ho hum. So I think that's why it gets a B and not an A, um, just because we had those elite guys, but there was nothing really special about it other than those two guys. We didn't really have a lefty specialist, which hurt, and we didn't really have many great long relief options. I think if we have, maybe a good long relief option or a guy who can come in and be a lefty specialist, that probably bumps this up to like a B plus, A minus. But that's not how it was this year. Overall, just doing some quick, rough, sort of math, um, it averages out to about a C or a C plus for the Reds as a team. And that's what this team was. They were about a C plus team. They were a couple games over 500, snuck into the playoffs. So, I think it averages out to about what this team was.
Yeah, I'm trying to do the math on the Guardians as far as what the overall grade is. Maybe I was a little harsh, but because the overall grade would probably be like a B minus for the Guardians. And I think the Guardians were slightly better than that. Um, I would give the Guard actually, they had two 10 game, they almost had two 10 game losing streaks, and they were really bad for a lot of the years. So honestly, maybe B plus is the way to go. I think their record was very deceiving with how they were for most of the year. So
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that'll wrap up positional grades, and we will get into our around the league segment to close out the episode. Um, Chris, you wanna touch on this first point here?
yeah, so I really enjoyed watching that game 5 of the ALDS. I think that might be a little bit of a hot take, but if you're a diehard baseball fan, that's like the dream game to watch. It went 15 innings. It was back and forth as far as momentum swing goes. I genuinely did not know who was going to win that game until it was actually won by Jorge Blanco. I think both teams had equal chances of winning that games or of winning that game. He had Tarek Skubal have his usual dominant start, and then I believe was it a bullpen game for the Mariners,
It was
or
not. I forget. It was Logan
was it
Gilbert,
George
I think,
Kirby?
or maybe it was George. It's whoever is starting tonight for the Mariners.
Okay, it
Or
was
no,
it was
it's not.
Gilbert. Gilbert's starting for the Mariners tonight, but I think
It
is
was George
George.
Kirby, I think.
I think it
Yeah.
was George Kirby, but I remember George Kirby being pretty good. There was just so much that happened in that game. And then you had who was yeah, you had so many starters come into that game in the bullpen, which I thought was just so interesting how they literally just emptied the bullpen out to get that win. I mean, you should. Um, but yeah, that was just such an interesting game. You had, Edward Bizardo had 2 2/3 innings of scoreless relief, and then um, I can't think of who pitched. Oh yeah, he had Jack Flaherty for the Tigers. He had a few strong innings. Yeah, that was just such a fun game to watch, and
Yeah,
I'm glad that the Mariners sent the Tigers home.
I was rooting for the Mariners, but like you said, that was if you're a baseball fan and you just enjoy the game, that was I mean, I would have gladly stayed up until 3 a.m. watching that game if it had gone that long. You know, I think we're both big fans of a lot of what Rob Manfred has done for, the game and the pace of play. I think this game shows how bad the Manfred man is though.
I agree.
You know, I get that on some random Tuesday in June, and it's a or a Wednesday matinee game in June, and it's a getaway day. You don't want the game going 15 innings and the team, emptying their bullpen because they had to cover 15 innings. But there's just so much tension that gets built in games like this, and the momentum swings back and forth. The Mariners get two on and they ground into a double play, and then the Tigers have guys on the corner, and Eugenio Suarez makes a play to get the guy at the plate, and it was just a really great game. And Jorge Polanco is quietly having a really, really good postseason. Um, Drove in the game-winning run there, and then he homered earlier tonight too. It was a three-run home run. So, um, I think Jorge Polanco, if the Mariners make and win the World Series, we might get a Jorge Polanco World Series MVP, which would be pretty awesome.
Yeah,
Um,
he Jorge Polanco has given me a lot of Randy Arozarena playoff 2020
yeah,
playoff vibes.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, I agree. I think that the I think there's a very good argument to be made for both sides of the Manfred runner argument, which I think is that's what makes the situation so tough is you do take out a lot of the integrity of the tenseness of the game by not having as many extra inning games go like 5 or 6 hours, but you also save so many arms, and with how many arm injuries there are, like it's very questionable to how teams would survive a season if there's a lot of games that go like I don't know 17, 18 innings or whatever.
right,
Like there's never those games anymore that go 14 or more innings. You just don't see that.
yeah. Moving on here, the Blue Jays dominated the Yankees to send them home and advance to the ALCS. Yeah, this series was pretty cut and dry. The Yankees took one to stay alive there for a second, but the Blue Jays sent them home the next night. Uh, Vlad Guerrero um, had a great series. And the Blue Jays really just took it to the Yankees for that series. Do you have anything on
I
that one?
was I was just so impressed with how the Blue Jays played the whole series. They were completely dominant and they played airtight baseball as well. Um, yeah, they played amazing defense like they have been all year, and they were getting timely hits. And Ernie Clement was he went like 9 for 11 or whatever in the ALDS. And he's a very underrated player, I think. So it was super fun to see a lot of guys contribute for the Blue Jays and knock out the evil Yankees. So
Another evil team, I guess, in our opinion, got sent home. They're going to
yeah.
Cancun is the Chicago Cubs. That's, a team that neither of us particularly root for or like. It was rough for me rooting for the Brewers, I'm gonna admit it. But they got the job done. They did what they needed to. That also went to 5 games. That game five was a lot more anticlimactic than the Mariners Tigers game. It was a 3-1 game. The Brewers just sort of kind of cruised to a win. Sal Frelick did hit a home run. He doesn't, or no, it was Bryce Durang hit a home run.
Yep.
He doesn't hit many of those. So that was kind of cool to see. But yeah, just that was just a series that was sort of back and forth. I think the home team won every game that series. It'll be interesting to see what the Brewers do against the Dodgers. That's sort of shaping up to be a, you know, small market versus big market series, and that's a maybe a bigger a metaphor for baseball at large as we move towards this new collective bargaining agreement with the small market versus big market stuff.
Yeah, I think these small market teams are going to have a much better chance at competing. Well, I guess I'll retract that statement until the bargain agreement actually does happen. But the way that it looks right now, I think that small market teams are going to have a little bit of a better chance because big market teams are going to be so heavily taxed. It seems when it comes to their spending and stuff. So.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, the Brewers are a very similar team to the Blue Jays, I think. I think that everybody is trying to model their teams after like the Brewers and Guardians and Rays and all them. And um, I think what you saw from the Blue Jays is a direct testament to what the Brewers kind of pioneered and on the National League side of things, at least.
Yeah, it's the Brewers are a team that they don't spend a lot, they're 25th in payroll, I think. Um but they draft and develop guys. They take these guys who aren't good elsewhere and they get them into their system, and they fix them. They're able to do that with a lot. I mean, Andrew Vaughn, for example, was dreadful on the White Sox this year. Came over to the Brewers. They tweaked his swing a little bit, and he was one of the best players for the second half of the season. If you're a small market team, you need to be modeling how to build your organization off of a Brewers or a Guardians, teams that are constantly seeing success with a bottom 10 payroll in the league. Um, and then we'll close it out with game one of the ALCS, which happened last night. The Mariners won 3-1, so Mariners up. Um, 1-0 in the series. They look to be well on their way to up 2-0 in the series, as they're up, I think, 7-3
They're
right
up
now.
uh they're up 9-3. Josh Naylor just hit a 2-run homer,
Oh,
so
well, yeah, that'll
yeah.
do it. Um, it was a really great pitchers duel for a lot of the game last night between Bryce Miller and Kevin Gausman. George Springer took Bryce Miller deep in the first inning, and then Cal Raleigh took Kevin Gausman deep later in the game to tie it before the Mariners added on two more. Um, After these first two games, we're going back to Seattle now. Do you think this one's pretty much wrapped up? Do you think the Mariners have it won, or do you think the Blue Jays
No.
are not done yet?
I don't think the Blue Jays are done yet. I think that the way that the Blue Jays played against the Yankees, they just haven't really found that in the first two games of the Mariners so far. I honestly thought that the Blue Jays were going to steamroll the Mariners in this series. I think there are two very evenly matched teams, but just with the Blue Jays momentum and how impressive they looked against the Yankees, I just I still think it's anybody's series. The the Blue Jays are gonna be down 2-0 going to Seattle, which will be very tough. But they're a team that never quits, and um, I think that the Mariners are a somewhat similar team, but the you're able to expose the Mariners, I think, a little bit easier than the Blue Jays. The Mariners have a little bit more talent on their team, I think, but the Blue Jays, I think, play with a little bit more heart than the Mariners do. If I had to,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I
So
it'll be rocking in Seattle, definitely. The Mariners are have never made it to the World Series. So if they can do that in front of the home crowd, that would be really, really cool. I was surprised. I am surprised at how well the Mariners have played these first two games, considering they, played a 15 inning game on Saturday on the West Coast. Had to, or that was it was Friday or Saturday they played that game.
I believe it was Saturday.
Okay,
No,
yeah. So
it was one of those 2 days.
it was Friday. It
I'm
was
getting mixed
Friday,
up
and
now.
then it
Yeah,
went
Friday.
into Saturday morning because
Yeah.
of the East Coast stuff. But they played a 15 inning game on Friday on the West Coast, flew to the East Coast, and are going to take the first two games of the series. It looks like, which is pretty impressive because, like you and I mentioned, they emptied their bullpen in that game five to win it. And their pitching staff has held the Blue Jays to one yesterday. Um, they've held them to three so far tonight, and the offense has done their job. I think people expected that coming off of that game and the travel that the Mariners would be sort of flat, and they're anything but. So, I think they're going to be scary when they get back to Seattle with that home crowd behind them. I don't know if it'll be a sweep, but I think I would be surprised if the series goes back to Toronto.
Yeah, I don't know. I really want this series to go to 7 games. I think this is such an entertaining matchup. Um,
Yeah,
Really, I want I want both CS series to go to 7 games, but I need my Brewers to win the NLCS. I need the Dodgers eliminated.
yeah. I'm gonna root for the Brewers for one more round, and then I'll be an AL fan in the World Series, and I hope it's the Mariners, although I wouldn't mind seeing the Blue Jays either. But
Yeah, the thing is with two good guys in the World Series, I feel like, I guess there's two quote unquote good guys in my book in the ALCS,
yeah,
but I guess I've had a little bit more of a history of hating the Blue Jays just because we the Indians played them in 2016 and
right.
Cleveland doesn't have much playoff history except, I think 2001 was the last time that the Indians and Guardians played the Mariners in postseason. But anyway, that's all. I digress.
Yeah, we'll leave you before we start getting into too much in the weeds with who we've played and who we like and who we dislike. But thank you so much for tuning into episode 38. If you enjoyed this one, leave a like, comment who you think should have won our awards, comment if you disagree with one of our positional grades. Let us know what you think we got wrong, and let us know what you think we got right. Uh, inflate our egos a little bit if you agree with us. Um, we'll leave you with that. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you.